Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. The good news is it looks like the storm is going to Myrtle Beach. The bad news is that a half a degree of change from where the storm is right this minute will put it directly over Savannah. So we're not out of the woods yet, but we look an awful lot better than we did earlier this morning. We had a conference call this morning to discuss evacuation. We will have another one this afternoon at 5 o'clock with our elected officials. It's the decision of the chairman of the county commission as to whether we will evacuate. As it stands now, if I had to make a recommendation, it would be no, but that's based on the way the storm is going. Certainly that can change. It's important that your viewers remember that this can change. They should still be preparing for a storm, and there's two more out there that are possibly coming in our direction. They don't look like it right now, but they could be. It's also significant that a couple of years ago, the National Hurricane Center changed their fashion of forecasting, and instead of giving us 3 days notice, they now give us 5 days notice. So you see much more of this. It gives us much more time to panic, much more time to say, oh my gosh, we're gonna get inundated. That does never excuse us for not being ready. We need to look at what it takes, what do you have to prepare for, what documents do you have to gather, what possessions do you have to gather if we have to evacuate. Can't stress that enough. Always be prepared. It's that time of year. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any questions? Yes.
You say as of right now, no evacuations. How much of a window do you really have between when you need to make a final call on that?
We're really in very good shape from that standpoint. If we had to make a call based on the current forecast, we would have more than ample time if we evacuated with a voluntary on Thursday at noon and Friday morning at 0600 for a partial mandatory. And at this stage of the game, it would only be islands and low-lying areas, which we'll define later by community, so that there's no possible mix-up in what defines an island or a low-lying area. But that's a what-if situation. Yes?
So are you saying it's highly unlikely that the entire county would go under a mandatory?
That's correct. The question was, is it highly unlikely that the entire county would go under mandatory? As it stands right now, and all this is really important, all this is based on the current forecast, that the entire county would not go under a mandatory. Might be a partial mandatory for islands and low-lying areas, but not a mandatory.
Now, without that degree of certainty,
the question is, because it's a very, very wide storm, the models are all over the map, how difficult is it to call? It's much more difficult than if it's coming straight at you. That's much, much easier to say. It's just mathematical at that point. You know, how many hours does it take to evacuate? How long for voluntary? How long for mandatory? In this case, it's do we or don't we. It's maybe tropical storm. It's maybe Category 1, maybe Category 2 storm. It's much, much more difficult to anticipate and to make that call. Yes?
How closely have you been working with the Georgia DOT for the contraflow out of Savannah and Chatham County?
Very closely.
Are they ready to make that switch?
They're ready to make it. I have tremendous confidence that they will work with us and they will follow our recommendations. Although for a partial mandatory for islands and low-lying areas, we would not turn the highway. Yes?
You mentioned that it makes it more difficult for you